The wilderness is beautiful, but it is rarely forgiving. From the icy fjords of Kodiak Island, where a Kodiak bear struck with unstoppable force, to the tundra of Svalbard, where a polar bear turned snowmobiles into chaos, these 6 hunting encounters reveal how quickly a careful expedition can become a desperate fight for survival, where not even skill and courage might be enough. On November 12, 2025, 5 experienced hunters set out into the narrow, wind-lashed fjords of Kodiak Island, their kayaks cutting through dark, choppy water as the cold November wind bit at their faces. Darius Monroe, 32, a seasoned outdoorsman who had guided hunts across Alaska for nearly a decade, led the group. Alongside him were Eli Voss, 29, meticulous and steady under pressure; Logan McKenzie, 35, a rugged hunter with years of backcountry experience; and 2 others, Jason Reed, 28, a keen tracker known for his calm, intense situations, and Mateo Alvarez, 31, a quiet but skilled marksman. Their goal was simple yet perilous: to scout remote cliffs for Sitka black-tailed deer before the hunting season ended, carrying rifles, packs, and all the gear necessary for a successful expedition. The fjord was narrow, flanked by towering cliffs streaked with ice, and the spruce trees at the shoreline bent under the gusts of wind that tore through the channel. The water, dark and cold, churned against the kayaks, threatening to tip them with each swell, and the hunters had to concentrate constantly on balance as their packs shifted with every movement. The early morning sun, low on the horizon, cast pale light across the water, illuminating the frost clinging to the trees and the icy spray that whipped into their faces. Darius led the line of kayaks cautiously, scanning the shoreline for movement while shouting instructions to keep formation and avoid tipping. He knew Kodiak Island's wildlife well. The massive brown bears that roamed its fjords were legendary for size and unpredictability. Still, nothing could have prepared them for what came next. From the shadows of a spruce thicket near the shoreline, a hulking shape emerged, dark brown against the gray forest backdrop. The hunters barely had time to register it before a massive Kodiak bear, easily over 1,600 pounds, charged with terrifying speed, splashing through the shallow water near the kayaks. Its jaws were wide, dripping, eyes fixed on the closest target, its enormous paws striking the water with explosive force. Chaos erupted instantly. Logan shouted warnings, though the sound was swallowed by the wind and crashing waves. The kayaks rocked violently as the bear slammed into them, capsizing 3 at once. Darius and Eli, closest to the far side, fired warning rounds into the air, their rifles shaking in their hands as they clung desperately to overturned hulls, fragments of packs and gear floating around them. The cold water stabbed at their limbs, threatening hypothermia as they struggled to maintain grip on their kayaks and debris. Logan, Jason, and Mateo were pinned beneath the overturned kayaks, the bear pounding relentlessly with its paws and biting with crushing jaws. The water churned red around them as their bodies were thrown against the hardwood and ice-cold water. The sound of snapping paddles, breaking packs, and splintering wood echoed through the fjord, mingling with the hunters' shouts and the bear's guttural roar. Darius and Eli could only watch in horror as their friends were crushed under the sheer weight and ferocity of the animal, powerless to save them with bullets or brute strength. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. Darius kept firing, aiming to drive the bear back while clinging to a fragment of a kayak, every muscle burning, fingers numb and slick with cold water. Eli gritted his teeth, swinging his pack toward the bear when it lunged too close, praying that their presence and noise would be enough to protect them. Finally, exhausted and perhaps deterred by the humans' desperate resistance, the Kodiak bear turned, lumbering back toward the forest with a force that left the fjord trembling in its wake. When the chaos subsided, the fjord was a scene of grim devastation. 3 of the hunters lay dead in the icy water, their overturned kayaks tangled with shattered gear and floating packs. Blood mixed with the frigid spray, and the forest beyond was eerily quiet. The only movement was the retreating shadow of the bear disappearing into the spruce. Darius and Eli, bruised, hypothermic, and emotionally shattered, pulled themselves from the debris, their limbs trembling uncontrollably from cold and adrenaline. Every movement was agony, but they dragged themselves and the remaining kayaks to the nearest shore, collapsing onto jagged rocks, staring at the fjord with a mixture of horror and disbelief. The attack had been over in moments, yet the aftermath would haunt them forever. Packs were ripped apart, rifles damaged, and personal effects scattered across the water. Darius's face was pale from the cold and shock, eyes fixed on the fjord as he tried to comprehend the scale of the loss. Eli's hands were raw from gripping the kayak, fingers numb, lips blue, yet his mind raced with disbelief, replaying the attack over and over, unable to erase the sight of their friends crushed beneath the bear's paws. By mid-afternoon, when rescue teams finally arrived, after Darius and Eli managed to signal authorities with a waterproof flare, the fjord was silent again. Search parties combed the shoreline, finding the bodies of Logan, Jason, and Mateo, confirming the tragic toll. The bear had vanished into the forest, leaving behind a grim testament to its raw power and the perilous reality of hunting in remote Alaska. For Darius and Eli, survival came at a harrowing cost. They were carried away, shivering, drenched, and emotionally broken, the weight of the day pressing heavily on their minds. The fjord, once a quiet corridor of potential game, had revealed its deadly secret, and the hunters' experience, skill, and courage had only narrowly been enough to preserve their own lives. The memory of November 12, 2025, would remain etched in their minds forever, a sobering reminder of the unforgiving power of Kodiak Island's wilderness and its largest predators. On September 28, 2024, the late-season air over northern Wyoming's open plains carried a crisp edge, and the tall grasses rippled like waves under a steady breeze. Jacob Reynolds, 31, a dedicated hunter with years of experience tracking large game, moved slowly along a river bend, his eyes scanning the landscape for the massive bulls that roamed these remote expanses. Armed with a .375 H&H rifle, Jacob had spent years learning to read the behavior of bison, understanding their moods, their unpredictable charges, and their immense power, knowing that a mature bull could easily weigh over 2,000 pounds. He had stalked elk and deer across the Rockies, but the plains held their own perils, and today he was acutely aware that a single misstep could turn a hunt into a deadly encounter. The grasses reached above his knees as he crept forward, careful to avoid breaking twigs or snapping brittle reeds that might betray his presence. The river bend ahead shimmered in the morning sun, reflecting the low clouds and giving the landscape a false serenity. Jacob had spotted a mature bull hours earlier, its massive hump and dark, shaggy coat partially hidden behind a distant rise. He had circled slowly to approach downwind, hoping to get a clear shot without disturbing it. Every sense was alert, every nerve thrummed with anticipation, but beneath the tension was a calm precision born of years spent in remote wilderness. As he neared a slight depression in the ground, Jacob crouched behind a scattering of rocks, his rifle resting lightly against his shoulder. eyes fixed on the massive bull grazing 20 yards away. The animal's ears flicked constantly, nostrils flaring as it scented the air, and Jacob reminded himself to breathe steadily, to keep movement slow, to avoid triggering the bull's natural defensiveness. Then, in an instant, the bull's head snapped up. Its dark eyes locked on his position, nostrils flaring wider, and the ground seemed to tremble with the force of its sudden awareness. The moment was electric. Jacob froze, realizing too late that the animal had spotted him. A deep snort echoed across the plains, and without hesitation, the bull lowered its massive horns and charged, hooves thundering against the dry earth with a sound that rattled the bones. Jacob's heart slammed against his chest as the ground quaked beneath the sheer weight of the bull, dust erupting in great clouds around its feet. He fired a warning shot over the animal's head, the rifle recoiling in his hands, but the bull did not hesitate, veering toward him with terrifying speed, horns aimed like a battering ram. Adrenaline surged, sharpening Jacob's reflexes as he dove to the side, rolling over the uneven ground to avoid the full force of the charge. Rocks scattered in every direction as the bull slammed into a small rise, its hooves pounding against the earth, sending vibrations up through Jacob's limbs. The air was thick with the smell of dust, sweat, and the powerful musk of the bull, a scent that clung to him and reminded him how close he had come to death. He scrambled to his feet, bruised and winded, heart hammering, and edged backward toward a fallen log that might provide cover. The bull circled him, pawing the ground and snorting, its massive frame radiating sheer power and unpredictability. Every movement was calculated, yet completely wild, a living force that could crush a man with a single strike. Jacob steadied his breathing, rifle at the ready, muscles coiled, knowing that any sudden motion could provoke another charge. Time slowed in the haze of adrenaline as the bull continued to circle, hooves tearing at the dry soil, kicking dust into Jacob's eyes, forcing him to wipe it away even as he kept his focus. His thoughts raced, analyzing escape routes, predicting the animal's next move, understanding that even though bulls were herbivores, when startled or threatened, they were among the most dangerous creatures in North America. Jacob felt every bruise and strain in his body as he pressed himself lower behind the log, using it as a fragile shield, trying to appear larger in his awareness, yet smaller in the animal's perception. Minutes passed in a tense standoff, the bull's chest heaving with every breath, muscles trembling under the thick coat of winter fur beginning to form for the coming cold. Jacob remained frozen, eyes locked on the bull's movements, each second stretching like an eternity. Eventually, the animal's attention drifted, curiosity and caution overriding aggression, and it turned away, lumbering back across the plain with a low, rumbling snort. Jacob exhaled slowly, every nerve finally beginning to release tension, but his body remained tense, bruised and aching from the near crush he had just endured. Once the bull disappeared beyond the rise, Jacob rose carefully, surveying the open plain with a wary gaze. The tall grasses rustled around him, a deceptive calm returning to the landscape as though nothing had happened. But he knew better. Every step of the hunt carried risk, and today the plains had reminded him with brutal clarity how swiftly a calm pursuit could erupt into a fight for survival. His muscles ached, heart still racing, and his mind replayed the charge over and over, a vivid memory of the power and unpredictability of a single massive bull. As he made his way back to camp along the river bend, Jacob reflected on the experience, a mixture of awe and fear settling deep within him. He knew he had survived because of split-second reflexes, years of preparation, and a clear understanding of the animal's behavior. But the encounter would remain etched in his memory forever. In the vast expanse of Wyoming's northern plains, where wind and grass stretched endlessly and no one was near to intervene, even a herbivore could become a predator, and the line between hunter and hunted could disappear in a heartbeat. On October 7, 2025, the narrow canyon in British Columbia was alive with the sounds of autumn. Distant rushing water, the rustle of dying leaves, and the occasional call of a crow echoing against the sheer rock walls. Ethan Ryder, 30, a veteran hunter accustomed to the rugged backcountry, led the small team. With him were Logan McKenzie, 35, steady under pressure and skilled in navigating difficult terrain, and Darius Monroe, 32, whose years of hunting across Alaska and western Canada had honed him to read both animal and environment with meticulous care. They were tracking a rutting bull wapiti, a prize that demanded patience and skill. Armed with 300 Winchester Magnum rifles, each hunter was aware of the weight of the moment and the perils of the canyon's uneven floor. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows down the canyon walls, and a thin fog rolled up from the valley floor, wrapping the team in an eerie haze. Rocks slick with recent rain made every step treacherous, and the hunters moved cautiously, using low calls to lure the bull into view. The canyon amplified each sound, and they could hear the echo of their own breaths as they scanned for movement. Their focus was precise, honed over years of experience, but the environment was as much a player as the elk they pursued, with rocks, cliffs, and sudden drops adding danger to each step. As Ethan crept forward, crouched behind a boulder for cover, he spotted the bull wapiti across the canyon floor. Its massive form, over 700 pounds, was partially obscured by the fog and the deep shadows, but its antlers gleamed in the fading light. The hunters exchanged glances, signaling silently, each ready to move as the bull turned its head toward the faint calls they used. The tension was palpable, every muscle coiled in anticipation, every step measured with care. Then, without warning, a distant rustle and an unidentifiable snapping sound triggered chaos. A herd of elk, spooked by a predator unseen in the fog, erupted into motion, crashing down the canyon in a thunderous stampede. Dust and debris flew as hooves struck the rocks with force, the sound of rushing bodies echoing off the canyon walls and vibrating through the hunter's feet. Ethan's heart leapt as he realized the magnitude of the danger. A lead bull, larger than any he had seen before, barreled straight toward them. Antlers lowered in momentum, muscles rippling under thick fur, eyes wide and wild. Ethan slipped on the wet rocks, hitting the ground hard and sliding toward a shallow ledge, while Logan stumbled into a jagged boulder, pain shooting through his shoulder as he braced for impact. Darius reacted instantly, throwing himself toward the canyon wall, only to be pinned as the surge of animals pressed him against the cold stone. Dust, leaves, and small rocks flew in every direction as the herd thundered past, antlers scraping, hooves striking with terrifying force. The noise was deafening, a rolling cacophony that left no room for thought, only raw survival instinct. The hunters' rifles were forgotten, their hands clawing at rocks and ledges to maintain balance, hearts pounding with adrenaline. Ethan felt the weight of elk bodies brushing past him, the impact throwing him against the stone, leaving cuts and bruises along his arms and back. Logan's clothes were shredded as he tumbled over boulders, hands scraping on jagged edges, every movement dangerous yet necessary to avoid being crushed. Darius, pinned by the sheer momentum of the passing herd, fought to keep his footing, pressing against the canyon wall, feeling the immense power of nature pressing relentlessly against him. Time stretched as the herd surged past, minutes that felt like hours, every second amplified by fear and the possibility of death or severe injury. The fog and shadows obscured vision, making it impossible to predict the herd's movements or gauge when the danger would end. Finally, after what seemed like endless chaos, the bulk of the animals veered off, moving toward a break in the canyon and leaving behind a landscape scattered with trampled grass, broken branches, and displaced rocks. The hunters, bruised and bleeding lightly from scratches and torn clothing, gathered themselves slowly, each inhaling the sharp, cold air with difficulty as adrenaline finally began to ebb. Ethan pressed a hand to his side, wincing as the cuts and scrapes throbbed painfully, and surveyed the aftermath. Rocks were displaced, gear had fallen from packs, and the canyon floor bore the chaotic traces of the massive herd. Logan groaned as he assessed his shoulder, feeling the sting of impact, while Darius leaned against a boulder, muscles sore, mind racing with relief and disbelief at their narrow escape. As they regrouped, the hunters reflected silently on the power and unpredictability of the wilderness. Even the most experienced men, skilled in tracking and understanding animal behavior, could be caught off guard when terrain, weather, and animal instincts combined in unforeseen ways. The canyon, once a promising path toward a prized bull, had become a gauntlet of danger, reminding them of the fine line between hunter and prey, between calculated pursuit and uncontrollable chaos. By the time the fog lifted slightly and the canyon quieted, the hunters had recovered enough to retrieve their scattered gear. Rifles were checked for damage, packs reorganized, and each man flexed sore muscles while casting cautious eyes toward the canyon exit. The memory of the stampede would linger, etched into their minds, a stark lesson in respect for the power of even herbivorous giants and the unforgiving landscape that framed their lives as hunters. As they finally emerged from the canyon, battered, bruised, and emotionally drained, Ethan, Logan, and Darius understood that the day's hunt had been less about scoring a trophy and more about survival. The late-season rut had offered the promise of glory, but it had also delivered a harrowing reminder. In the backcountry, where every step carries risk, even a herd of elk could turn a calm, precise hunt into a perilous fight against overwhelming force. On September 22, 2023, Sergei Ivanov, 34, and Mikhail Karpov, 31, parked their RV in a small clearing along a remote Siberian river, the dense spruce forest closing in on all sides. The diesel engine had cooled, and the late-season air carried a sharp, earthy scent, heavy with the promise of autumn frost and the decay of fallen leaves. The men had used the RV as their base camp for a late-season elk hunt, unpacking supplies and game they had carefully stored for the journey. They had been hunting together for years, experienced in navigating the unforgiving Russian wilderness, but nothing could have prepared them for the sheer force of what would arrive. The RV sat quietly, its aluminum walls gleaming faintly in the muted afternoon sun. Inside, cabinets were filled with provisions, small packs of venison carefully wrapped and stored, and rifles leaned against the seats, ready but not yet needed. Sergei sorted the supplies while Mikhail checked over their hunting gear, the forest outside alive with distant bird calls and the whisper of wind through the spruce. The clearing seemed deceptively calm, a pocket of order in the sprawling chaos of Siberia's wilderness, but the sharp scent of game and cooking supplies had already alerted something much larger. Without warning, a hulking shape moved through the spruce at the edge of the clearing. The grizzly, over 1,500 pounds, pushed through the underbrush with terrifying power, its massive shoulders and head nearly invisible behind the dense foliage until it crashed into view. Its eyes, dark and focused, fixed on the RV, nostrils flaring as it picked up the scent of venison. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the bear slammed against the side of the vehicle, denting the aluminum and rattling the cabinets inside. Sergei froze momentarily, recognition of the danger flashing across his face while Mikhail's grip tightened on the rifle. The first strike of the bear sent a shock through the RV, forcing chairs to topple and supplies to scatter across the floor. The hunters scrambled inside, pressing against walls and furniture as the bear clawed at the doors with relentless strength. A paw tore through the thin aluminum, jagged holes forming instantly as the beast tested the RV's defenses. Dust and splinters sprayed into the interior, and the roar of metal bending echoed through the clearing. The grizzly pawed violently at anything it could reach, overturning a small table, scattering papers, and sending food and gear flying in every direction. Adrenaline surged through Sergei and Mikhail as they grabbed a fire extinguisher, jamming it into the largest gap to deter the bear while gripping their rifles with hands trembling from tension and cold. Every moment was a test of nerve. The RV, once a refuge, had become a trap, its walls insufficient against the bear's raw power. The bear swung its massive head and claws against the aluminum, growling and roaring, each movement shaking the vehicle and leaving deep dents that would remain for years. The floor vibrated beneath their feet with every strike, and the men were forced to brace themselves against cabinets and seats to avoid being knocked down or injured. Minutes dragged tense and chaotic. The bear's attention was drawn intermittently by the scent of game and the movement inside, each roar and swipe reverberating through the RV like a hammer against iron. Sergei pushed himself against the wall, watching the jagged hole where the bear's paw had torn through, heart pounding in time with the thundering strikes outside. Mikhail's eyes never left the creature, calculating every movement, ready to fire if it attempted to enter further, yet acutely aware that even the largest caliber rifle might not immediately halt such a massive predator in such close quarters. The forest around them was silent except for the grizzly's assault, a surreal contrast to the noise inside. The two hunters shouted in unison, banging pots and yelling to startle the bear, hoping to trigger caution in the massive animal. For several tense minutes, the grizzly paused occasionally, sniffing and pawing, its muscles tense and movements deliberate, testing the resistance of the RV as if measuring the limits of its own strength. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it retreated, lumbering back into the dense forest, leaving behind a trail of dented aluminum, overturned chairs, shredded supplies, and a silence that was almost unbearable in its suddenness. When the threat had passed, Sergei and Mikhail leaned against the walls of the RV, breathing heavily, bodies trembling from a combination of adrenaline, fear, and cold. Their clothes were torn, faces streaked with sweat and dust, and every muscle ached from bracing against the blows. The RV, once a secure haven, was now a battered shell, supplies destroyed, shelves splintered, and the echoes of the attack lingering in every dented surface. Both hunters were bruised, shaken, and painfully reminded that even a fortified vehicle is no match for a full-grown grizzly in its natural environment. By the time the men had sorted through the wreckage and taken stock of what remained usable, the forest had returned to its quiet state, the wind whispering through the spruce and the river flowing steadily in the background. Sergei flexed sore fingers, reflecting on the encounter, understanding that survival had depended as much on the presence of mind as on skill or weaponry. Mikhail gathered what supplies were left, his face pale, eyes scanning the tree line, knowing how easily the situation could have ended in disaster. The memory of the attack would remain vivid in their minds, a lesson in respect and caution, a reminder that the wild could strike suddenly with force that dwarfed human ingenuity. The RV had survived, barely, but the grizzly's power had been undeniable, leaving an indelible mark on both the vehicle and the men who had endured its wrath. In the wilderness of Siberia, experience, preparation, and vigilance could only go so far, and even the most seasoned hunters were vulnerable to the raw, untamed force of nature. On November 26, 2021, the late autumn air hung heavy over the wetlands of southern Poland, cold and damp, carrying the scent of decaying reeds and earth soaked by recent rains. Milan Novak, 33, and Oscar Krieger, 35, were participating in a luxury hunting expedition at a private reserve known for its large populations of wild boar. The reserve offered high-end accommodations and guided hunts, and both men were experienced hunters accustomed to the discipline and strategy of tracking dangerous game, though the controlled environment of this hunt gave them a false sense of security. Armed with .30-06 rifles and wearing high-end waterproof gear, they moved carefully through the flooded marshes, where shallow swamp channels cut through the reeds and mud, each step sucking at their boots and forcing constant attention to footing. The reserve had been quiet that morning. The only sounds were the occasional splash of water from distant wildlife and the whisper of the wind through tall reeds. Milan and Oscar had tracked a massive wild boar rumored to weigh over 400 pounds, moving slowly and methodically, using the guidance of the reserve's trackers to approach without alarming the animal. The late-season light cast long, diffuse shadows across the marsh, giving the reeds a ghostly, swaying appearance. Every sense was heightened. Milan's eyes scanned the dense vegetation for movement, while Oscar tested the stability of the raised wooden platforms scattered across the reserve to gain vantage points over the flooded channels. They were closing in cautiously when a sudden rustling erupted from the dense reeds nearby. The massive boar, larger than either man had anticipated, burst forward with explosive speed, tusks glinting in the weak sunlight, eyes fixed and furious. Oscar, standing on a platform that rose barely a meter above the swamp, was caught off guard. The boar slammed into the supports with bone-jarring force, knocking him off the platform and sending him plunging into the murky, icy water below. Water and mud exploded in every direction, obscuring vision and filling his mouth and nose with the acrid taste of swamp sediment. Milan's reaction was instantaneous, adrenaline surging as he tried to retreat over the soft, muddy ground, but the marsh swallowed his boots with every step, anchoring him in place. The boar whirled through the reeds, its massive body moving with terrifying agility despite its bulk, tusks scraping against packs and gear, splintering wooden stakes and tearing at the vegetation. Each strike of its snout and hooves shook the soft ground beneath Milan's feet, forcing him to brace himself against nearby reeds and stumps to avoid being thrown into the swamp. The noise of the attack, the splash of water, the snapping of reeds, the guttural grunts of the boar, created a chaotic soundscape that left no room for thought, only survival instinct. Milan raised his rifle, fingers trembling, and fired a warning shot, the crack of the gun echoing across the marsh like a clap of thunder. The bullet grazed the beast, drawing a sharp cry from it, but not enough to halt the attack immediately. The boar charged twice more, circling and striking, tusks scraping his legs, packs, and even brushing against his coat, sending a shower of mud and vegetation into the air. Each charge left Milan bruised and soaked, mud clinging to his clothes, every movement a battle against both the animal and the unforgiving marsh that threatened to trap him permanently. Oscar struggled in the murky water, arms clawing at reeds and submerged branches, trying to keep his head above the surface while remaining aware of the boar's position. His clothing was heavy and waterlogged, making movement slow and exhausting. He gritted his teeth against fear and cold, trying to back toward firmer ground, knowing that even a single tusk strike from this massive animal could be fatal. Every second stretched endlessly, each heartbeat a loud drum in his chest, every breath stolen between splashes and frantic movements. Eventually, Milan's repeated warning shots, combined with the boar's irritation at the unfamiliar gunfire, forced the animal to retreat into the dense reeds, disappearing with astonishing speed despite its size. The sudden silence was deafening, leaving only the sound of dripping water, distant crows, and the faint rustle of the swamp. Both men collapsed into the mud. Exhaustion, bruises, and the lingering shock weighed heavily on them. Their bodies shook from adrenaline and cold, clothing shredded and soaked, rifles smeared with mud, packs torn and gear scattered across the swampy ground. As they slowly pulled themselves from the treacherous marsh, Milan and Oscar assessed the aftermath of the encounter. Reeds were trampled, small wooden platforms splintered, and the ground was churned to a thick, uneven mud by the force of the boar's charge. Both hunters had been caught off guard despite experience. The illusion of a controlled, guided hunt was shattered in an instant by the raw unpredictability of a massive European wild boar. Milan rubbed his bruised ribs and checked the rifle, while Oscar examined cuts on his arms and legs, both silently acknowledging how quickly skill and preparation could be overwhelmed by sheer force and speed. The swamp, once serene and controlled, had become a dangerous arena in a matter of seconds, leaving them exhausted, wet, and painfully reminded that even in luxury hunts, the creatures they pursue were still wild, powerful, and capable of turning the most carefully planned expedition into a battle for survival. Both men knew that their experience and reflexes had been the only factors that allowed them to escape with minor injuries, and they moved with deliberate caution as they made their way back toward the reserve's lodge, carrying with them the humbling knowledge that nature's unpredictability could upend even the most controlled hunts. By the time they reached solid ground, the sun had dipped low behind distant trees, casting the marsh in long shadows, and the wet chill settled into their bones. Every muscle ached, and every movement reminded them of the force of the animal they had just encountered. The memory of the boar's charge, the snapping of reeds, the splash of mud and water, and the sheer terror of near destruction would remain with Milan and Oscar forever, a vivid lesson in respect for the power and unpredictability of even herbivorous game when cornered or startled in their natural habitat. On March 5th, 2019, the frozen tundra of northern Svalbard stretched endlessly under a pale winter sun, winds cutting across the ice like sharpened knives, and snowdrifts concealing dangerous pressure ridges in the frozen sea. Erik Solberg, 34, a seasoned Norwegian hunter with years of Arctic experience, led a small team across the ice on snowmobiles, their engines roaring against the eerie silence of the polar landscape. With him were Lars Høvik, 32, precise and deliberate in tracking Arctic wildlife, and Jonas Berg, 29, agile and alert despite the bitter cold. They were scouting for Arctic foxes and seal tracks, carrying food, rifles, and game bags strapped securely to their sleds. Each man was experienced in the unforgiving environment, yet the Arctic offered no guarantees, and even seasoned hunters knew that danger could appear without warning. The snow glinted in the weak sunlight, the horizon blurring in fog and drifting powder. Each snowmobile left a crisp track behind, marking their careful route across the shifting ice, but the wind was deceptive, carrying sounds and scents in ways that could betray their presence or attract unwelcome attention. Eric guided the team cautiously, scanning the ridges ahead and the undulating white plains that could hide both prey and predator. The cold gnawed through layers of insulated clothing, but their focus remained absolute. They were hunters, skilled and deliberate, accustomed to reading the subtle signs of movement in the frozen wilderness. As they rounded a foggy ridge, the landscape ahead seemed deceptively quiet, the snow unbroken except for distant tracks that promised seals or foxes. Without warning, a massive shape emerged from the mist, low and powerful, moving with astonishing speed across the ice. A polar bear, easily over 1,200 pounds, had picked up the scent of their food and game bags, and it charged with terrifying purpose. The roar of its exhalation seemed to vibrate the ice beneath their snowmobiles as it lunged toward the closest rider, massive paws striking the surface with force that shook the frozen ground. Eric's heart leapt as he slammed the throttle, narrowly leaping aside from his snowmobile when the bear swiped at it with crushing power. The sled flipped violently, throwing snow and ice into the air, while Lars and Jonas skidded desperately to avoid the bear's massive paws, engines roaring and blades of ice spraying in every direction. The predator yowled, circling the trio with a combination of curiosity and aggression, confused by the roaring engines, the sudden movements, and the human scent mixed with food. Its black eyes were fixed, calculating, muscles rippling beneath thick white fur as it tested the strange, fast-moving intruders in its territory. Adrenaline surged through Eric's body as he scrambled to regain control, rifle in hand, firing warning shots into the air to assert his presence. The shots echoed across the tundra, startling the bear temporarily, though it did not retreat immediately, instead moving with cautious circling, testing the boundaries of its potential attack. Snow sprayed from its paws as it charged, paused, and reoriented repeatedly, the crunching ice beneath its weight a relentless reminder of the predator's size and strength. Lars and Jonas coordinated instinctively, maneuvering their snowmobiles to create space while keeping close enough to cover each other if the bear came too near. Their eyes never left the animal, reading each twitch of the ears, each shift of weight, anticipating the next strike. Every second was a delicate balance of speed, control, and reaction, a tense game where a single misstep could end in crushing injury or death. The Arctic wind whipped snow into their faces, freezing moisture in their beards and eyelashes, yet the hunters could not afford distraction. The attack continued for several tense minutes, the bear swiping at sleds, teeth snapping near runners, paws striking snow with such force that it sent shards of ice flying through the air. The hunters' rifles cracked intermittently, warning shots meant to drive the predator back while maintaining enough distance to avoid provoking a direct charge. The engine's vibration, combined with the shifting snow, created an unstable battlefield, each movement unpredictable, each decision potentially life-saving or catastrophic. Finally, after what seemed an eternity in the frozen silence punctuated by the chaos of swerving snowmobiles and the bear's guttural yowls, the polar bear retreated, melting back into the fog and drifting snow with massive, deliberate strides. The roar of engines slowed, and silence returned to the tundra except for the wind sweeping over frozen ridges. Snowmobiles lay dented and scraped, supplies scattered, and the men were bruised, shaking, and exhausted, their adrenaline slowly fading into the bone-deep cold. Each breath was sharp and ragged, each movement reminding them of the raw power of the Arctic apex predator they had encountered. Eric, Lars, and Jonas surveyed the aftermath, taking stock of equipment, checking rifles, and ensuring that no one was injured beyond minor bruising. The snowmobiles bore dents and gouges from the bear's claws. Sleds were knocked askew, and game bags had shifted dangerously, leaving traces of torn fabric in the snow. The encounter had been swift and chaotic, a brutal reminder that mechanized travel offered little real protection against a predator accustomed to the ice and snow, and that even the most experienced hunters were vulnerable in the face of raw, unrestrained force. By the time the men set off cautiously toward more stable terrain, the Arctic landscape returned to deceptive serenity, the pale light glinting off snowdrifts and frozen ridges. Their muscles ached from tension, their minds replayed the attack in vivid detail, and the memory of the polar bear's speed, power, and terrifying presence would remain etched in their minds for years. Survival, they understood, depended as much on instinct and calm under pressure as on experience, rifles, or vehicles, and the tundra had once again demonstrated that humans were always guests in the harsh and unforgiving realm of the Arctic.